Today we're going to breadboard one of the most iconic fuzz circuits ever made, the ZVEX Fuzz Factory. With 5 knobs you can get anything from classic fuzz to gated tones and wild oscillation. If you want to follow along, a parts list will be down in the description. Now grab your breadboard and let's get started. Welcome back to another breadboard tutorial, and today we're going to be doing the ZVEX Fuzz Factory. I've gotten a few requests for this one and I'm excited to be doing the first fuzz on the channel. So with all of that out of the way, let's get right into it. We're going to first start down here in this power section right here where we have this 5K potentiometer controlling how much voltage reaches the rest of our circuit. So to do this, I'm just going to grab my 5K potentiometer and just put it somewhere in the bottom of my breadboard like that. And then I'm going to take a jumper, and coming out of my power rail, I'm going to jump this into the wiper lug of my potentiometer. So that center lug right there. Then what I'm going to do, because this controls the voltage for the rest of the circuit, I'm actually going to go from pin number 1 into my negative rail right here. So now my negative rail is going to be the reference voltage for the rest of my circuit. So this rail right here, the power rail, is going to be connected to my power like that. But the negative rail is going to be connected to the lug number 1 of my potentiometer. So all of these dots right here on the blue rail, I'm going to be able to use as my reference voltage. All right, now that that's done, I'm going to start over here with the input, and I'm going to add a 10 microfarad capacitor going into a 2N3904 transistor. And it's important to note the orientation of that capacitor. It is polarized, and if you've never used a polarized capacitor, the negative leg is the leg with the little graphic, or visually it's just the shorter leg. So in this case, the positive leg is going to be touching the base of our transistor. So I'm just going to drop the cap into the breadboard like that. And then I'm going to grab a jumper and connect the cap to our guitar's input. So the guitar input is touching the negative leg like that. And like I mentioned before, I'm using a 2N3904 transistor. And this is a PNP transistor, so it has a base, an emitter, and a collector leg. And the positive leg of our capacitor is going to be touching that middle base leg. So I'm just going to drop it into the breadboard, making sure that the capacitor is touching the middle leg. So just like that. The next thing that I'm going to do is connect the emitter leg to ground and then put a 220K resistor across the base and the collector legs. So using another jumper, I'm going to take the jumper from the emitter leg and then jump into my ground rail up here. And these rails are just going to be connected to ground and power as usual. So just like that, and the emitter leg is this leftmost leg jumping into the ground rail. And then additionally, I do have a 220K resistor, and this is going to be going across our base and our collector leg, so the middle and the rightmost leg. Just like that. The last thing I have to do for this first little transistor stage is add this 10K resistor coming off of our reference voltage, which is our blue rail right here, going into our collector leg. So I'm actually going to rearrange my jumpers a little bit here. I'm not changing the connections, I'm just changing the pins that they're sitting in, just so I have a little bit more room to get my 10K resistor up here. I'm going to put my 10K resistor like that, touching the collector, and then I'm going to use a jumper to connect the 10K resistor to the reference voltage, like that. So we can see this jumper coming out of our little reference voltage rail touching our 10K resistor, which is going into our collector. Next, I'm going to add this 0.1 microfarad or 100 nanofarad coupling capacitor in between the collector of our first transistor here and the base of our first germanium transistor. And for this, I'm using the AC125F germanium transistor. I don't exactly remember where I got this, but I had 2 of them, so I'm using it for this project. So I'm just going to drop this into the breadboard somewhere over here in its own section, making sure that the legs are not touching any of the other components. And I'm going to grab my 100 nanofarad coupling capacitor, which is going to be connected between the collector of our 2N3904 transistor and the base of our germanium transistor. Just like that. And the pinout of my germanium transistor is the same as my 2N3904. It is the emitter, base, and then the collector leg. All right, the next connection we're going to make is right down here where we can see the emitter of our first germanium transistor is connected straight to the reference voltage. And for that, I'm just going to use a jumper. So putting one side of the jumper in that rail right there, and then the other side of the jumper touching the emitter leg. Next, I'm going to add this gain potentiometer, which is a 10K, and it is connected to the collector through a 470 ohm resistor. So I'm going to place my 470 ohm resistor, making sure one leg is touching my collector and the other leg is in a new section of the breadboard like that. And then I'm going to grab my 10K potentiometer. I'm actually going to stretch the leg out just a tiny bit more because it needs to go into the lug number 1. So something like that. And then our wiper lug of our gain potentiometer is connected to ground. So I'm just going to add a jumper like this, and it's going to be connected to ground. All right, at this point, I'm going to add my second germanium transistor and start making these connections right here, which are connected across both of these transistors. So again, in a new section, I'm just going to drop my second germanium transistor down here into my breadboard where there's no existing connections. And the first connection that I'm going to make is this 47K resistor coming off of the base of our first transistor going to the emitter of our second transistor. All right, so for this connection, I'm just going to add my 47K transistor to the base of my first germanium transistor. And I'm just going to jump it down here into this section of the breadboard, and then using a jumper, I can jump that into the emitter of my second germanium transistor. And again, I'm using 2 of the same germanium transistors, so they have the same pinout. And for me, my emitter is this left leg right here. And then also connected to the emitter, I have another 10K potentiometer, which acts as a drive control. I'm going to just add another jumper coming off of the emitter going into lug number 3. Like that. And then lug number 1, which is this right lug right here, is going to be connected to our reference voltage. Referring back to the schematic, coming off of our wiper lug, we have this 10 microfarad capacitor with the positive leg touching our reference voltage. So this drive control should look something like this. So looking at our second germanium transistor, we can see our base is connected to the collector of our first germanium transistor. So let's quickly do that. And for this, I'm going to use a little bit of a larger jumper just because it's going to make our lives a little bit easier. And then this gets jumped into the base of our germanium transistor, which is our middle leg. And then looking down here, we can also see connected to our emitter, we have this comp control here, and it is another 10K potentiometer. So I'm just going to add another 10K potentiometer to the breadboard right there. And our wiper lug number 2 is going to be connected to our emitter leg of our second germanium transistor. So adding another jumper wire. This is going to be jumping into our wiper. And then lug number 1 is going to be connected to our reference voltage. Just like that. All right, one more little section to go, and it's going to be this volume section right here. So referring back to our second germanium transistor, we have this 5.1K resistor connected to the collector. And for this section, I am going to use another jumper just because it is getting very crowded over here. I'm going to jump it up into this section of the breadboard where there's no connections. And then coming off of that jumper, I'm going to add my 5.1K resistor, which will be going into lug number 1 of our 5K volume potentiometer. So I'm going to stretch this over just a tiny bit. And that resistor is going to be going into our lug number 1, making sure that the other legs are not touching our jumper. And then lug number 3 of our potentiometer is going to be connected to ground. And then our wiper, we're going to have a 10 microfarad capacitor. And then coming off of our negative leg, we'll have a 220K resistor going to ground. So adding our capacitor to the breadboard on our wiper leg, I'm going to add our capacitor, making sure that the negative leg is over here. And then finally, I'm going to add our 220K resistor going to ground, coming off of that same point, just like that. So right here on the breadboard in this row, this is going to be our output. I'm going to take a jumper, connect it to this row, and then hook this up to our output. So this is the full circuit. I'm going to quickly test it and come back and let you know if there are any changes that I need to make. I just got back from testing the circuit and everything is working as expected. I really hope you enjoyed this short tutorial on this iconic fuzz. Let me know down in the comments what you'd like to see in future breadboard tutorials. Consider subscribing if you're enjoying this content. I also recently launched a community Discord, so definitely join that if you're interested in pedal building, or if you just need help debugging your circuit, there's plenty of people that can help you over there. So check out the link in the description. I think the only thing left to do is to hear this awesome fuzz circuit in action.